Well, Genesis 2 recounts how we actually got here, the fact that God created mankind. Picking up in verse 4, we see these are the generations of the heavens and the earth, and when they were created, in the day that God made the earth and the heavens. That's a summary statement. That's also, when you see the phrase in Genesis, these are the generations of, those are markers. They're ending or beginning new sections. And so that's what we have here. And we've gone from now the creation of absolutely everything and how the earth got life on it to actually the sixth day when mankind is created. Verse 5, when no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the land, and there was no man to work the ground. Now, that's going to be an interesting little tidbit. And again, as we're not looking for Genesis to be a scientific text here, but there are some scientific clues. And what's interesting here is that the Bible goes out of its way to say there was not yet any rain. And that has led some to think that because God was watering the planet from subterranean sources, and we'll see that later, that there may have been a canopy of water that existed over the earth that at the time of the flood will come crashing down and supply enough water for it to be a global flood. But again, there's a lot of science behind that that's just not here in the text, but it does go out of its way to say that there was not yet any rain and there was not anyone to work the garden. So remember, and especially the fact that God's calling this a garden, God is creating order out of chaos, and he creates man as part of that job of bringing more order out of chaos. We're gardeners in a sense. We're supposed to be taking care of this planet, and we're to work the ground. Verse 6, and a mist was going up from the land that was watering the whole face of the ground. So it's not yet raining, but God is supplying water. And then in a very quick statement, it says, then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. There's a lot of theology in those quick words. And essentially, here's where the Hebrew text is interesting. Adam's name, Adam, actually means ground or dirt man. That's the name of our forefathers. And it reminds us of the fact that we are created from the dust of the ground. And so God took of the earth itself to create bodies for us, but yet we're not just some sort of mechanistic creatures. God has to breathe into us this breath of life, and man becomes a living being, living creature. Now that means, one, that we're animate, meaning we can walk around and interact with our environment, but we're also aware. And that's the part of God breathing into us and creating us in his image. And remember, as we had talked in the previous videos about Anthony Flew, the famous atheist author, philosopher, who came later on in his life to believe that there was a God because he couldn't explain how inanimate matter all of a sudden becomes animate, but worse than that, how we become aware, how we become conscious. There's much more going on to us within us than we're just simply reacting to an environment. This is really critically important. The Bible's very, very clear that we have a creator. And frankly, if you look all around us and see all of the order of creation and our ability to think and interact, there's got to be a cause that's adequate for this. What makes it so hard to believe that there is an infinite creating being that is responsible for this? What prevents us from just even entertaining that idea? And we want to make everything sort of impersonal, and everything is, maybe it's a leftover from modernistic views, and that science can actually answer everything. But here, even though there's a lot of science behind this, the Bible's very, very clear that there's an external creator who is creating us and making us like him, and so therefore we can think and we can interact. And then in verse 8, the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east. So this becomes sort of like the Holy of Holies. It is a garden that we are supposed to tend. Adam and Eve were supposed to tend it, even though Eve is not yet created. But it was sort of like the Holy of Holies in God's macro temple. And from this garden, we were to tend the whole earth and bring order to the whole earth. So if the world is kind of like, a temple of God, this would be the Holy of Holies. This would be the place where we started, where we actually commune with God. Adam and Eve would walk with the Lord, and we'll see that later on as they walk with the Lord in the cool of the day. So unhindered access to God because sin is not yet there. This is going to be an important point. So he plants this garden, and out of the ground the Lord made to spring up every tree that is pleasant in the sight and good for food. So we're going to be setting up a test now. There's going to be one single test, and that test is going to be, you can eat of any tree you want, eat as much as you want. Just don't eat from this particular tree. So he sets up this garden, and in the midst of the garden, verse 9, a tree of life was in the midst. Now that's like right in the center of the garden. You can't miss this thing. Right in the midst of the garden, there was this tree of knowledge of good and evil. And this is going to be the test. Just don't eat of that tree, and boom, there it is. You don't have to go looking for it. It's right there. Verse 10, a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there were divided, it became 4 rivers. The name of the first is Pishon, that flowed to the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It's one that flowed around the whole land of Cush. All these names are lost to us since the rearrangement of the earth with the flood. The name of the third river is the Tigris, which flows east of Assyria, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. So somehow the Tigris and the Euphrates once flowed out of Eden. Now the flood is going to change all that, but those 2 rivers are not unknown to us. They're just rearranged as the planet's going to get rearranged. We'll get to that. The Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. Now that's verse 15. That's a really critical verse, because the 2 Hebrew words, to work and to keep, are the exact words that later on the priests are going to have as their function. They are to work and keep. They are to guard the temple of God. They are to keep it. That is their job. They're workers and keepers. And I think that part of the reason why those words are used here with man is that we are, and we're set as priests in God's macro temple. And so here, the Garden of Eden would be the Holy of Holies, and the whole earth was to actually be the cultivated temple of God, but the Garden of Eden itself was a place where we could actually talk and walk with God. So this is a foreshadow of what is about to come. There's a test. You can walk with me, you can be made in my image, and we'll see that, but don't eat of that tree. If you eat of that tree, it's going to be death. And that's where we're going next.